Thank you very much, Gladwell. First of all, congratulate Wachira for this struggle that has produced this excellent report. AfriCOG for synthesizing this. As I said, the debate on corruption has been is decades old, and this takes us to a new level of articulating and understanding it. I'd also like to take this opportunity to salute our Auditor General, Bwana Edward Ouko, for the professionalism and consistency that you have demonstrated in public office ever since they took you from African Development Bank into the Kenya government. And yes, you are here with civil society who are saying sometimes uncomfortable things about people who you are going to meet this afternoon. But one of the things about, ever since Edward took this office, every time the Auditor General's office is invited for an event that touches on issues of public finance, his people always come. So we congratulate you for that, and we salute you for that. And as usual, my friend David Ndi, for breaking all the eggs and making them into an omelette. My remarks will be few, because I think a lot has been said that brings us to this point of this thing we're calling state capture. I first heard the word in South Africa with regard to President Zuma and the Guptas. And there is an ongoing commission on state capture there called the Zondo Commission, which, if you have time and go online, you can see its proceedings. But I started just two anecdotes. The first one is this issue, Bonaoko, that you mentioned, of procurement officers in government. And when I joined government, one of the things that we realized was that, of course, public procurement was a mess. And actually, later I came to realize it was the most corrupt officers who come forward and tell you, thank you so much for coming. You don't know how difficult things have been. These people who were there before were thieves. Life was so difficult. We've been waiting for you, and here is the file, and there's corruption everywhere. And so you became immediately overwhelmed by information of different scandals, especially regarding procurement, to the point of paralysis. And so this idea, which I've seen has been repeated by this regime quite recently, we said, okay, can we sack all these procurement officers? We started a serious debate at the highest levels of government. Can we do this? Said, no, it's not possible. Can we reshuffle them? You know, it became something of which the top of government was obsessed. So ultimately, actually, what we did was take the reports of the Controller and Auditor General, the Public Accounts Committee, Public Investments Committee, and other government documents and contracts, and then just basically draw up a table and see where were the repeating problems. And what was fascinating was that we found at the top of government, in three particular departments, in the Office of the President, Ministry of Finance, and in Security, there were procurement officers who were circulated only within those 12 guys, 12 men, who for 20 years had been circulating within just those three departments. And when you looked at all these things, we call them Goldenberg, Anglo Leasing, etc., the signatures of those 12 are on all those documents. And so we said, okay, instead of having to reboot the entire system, why don't we deal with just these 12? Instead, we did what was done recently by this government, was to reboot the whole system. We rebooted the whole system, but the 12 were untouched. It was a very important lesson for me as a sort of young and eager person from civil society of how this thing works. There is an organization, called Global Financial Integrity, that was started in the mid-2000s to measure basically illicit flows and how countries are doing in terms of implementing institutions and legislation for fighting corruption around the world. I think they're based in Washington, and they do good research for anybody who's involved in the field of anti-corruption. And they used to have a ranking of countries in terms of their performance in implementing anti-corruption institutions and anti-corruption legislations. And about 3 or 4 years ago, an embarrassment started to emerge in that some of the best performing countries, at least in Africa, two were Uganda and Kenya. Now, the problem was that in the Transparency Corruption Perception Index, these countries were consistently bottom 25%. Yet, they had the best anti-corruption legal and institutional infrastructure in Africa. So, to their credit, the Global Financial Integrity have discontinued this, this index. You know, we've just gone into a second Eurobond. This one is being called, third, sorry. This one is being called Kachumbari, which gives it a sense of that very Kenyan way of it's half joking, half bitter naming of things which are hurting you. So if this one was Kachumbari, the last one was Ugali that went down, and this one is following. But over the last 6-7 years, I have followed closely the corruption, both the smash and grab that Gladwell was talking about, the dams and the like, but also this repurposing of institutions for state capture by a few individuals and by a few families, and the apparent incompetence that has led to some of these loans being acquired, some of the projects that are implemented, where you look at them and you say, surely this can't be, this seems very, very silly. This is great incompetence. I don't think we have had a central bank governor go to Githongo to launch a project in our history, as far as I can remember. But these strange things are happening. And when I started doing a bit of research into it, first of all, the incompetence argument doesn't fly, because our senior public officials right now, even especially in finance, in the Ministry of Finance, etc., are amongst the best educated, most exposed we have ever had in our history. Many of them have been to Ivy League institutions, have worked for the IMF, etc., World Bank. So incompetence doesn't cut it. There's something more deliberate and sinister that is at play. And I found it, and I haven't finished doing this research, but there are two groups of documents that tell a very interesting story. Number one, the regular miscellaneous amendments bills that come out. And number two, the regular gazette notices that come out listing the appointments of individuals to head parastatals or different government organs. And if you look at the individuals, I just did a bit of an audit of the individuals being appointed to all manner of small Kenya Forestry, Kenya Ports Authority. You will find many of them are all connected to each other. They drink together, they went to school together. So it's one group. So the capture that we're talking about at that level, for me, was very apparent just from gazette notices. These are all people who can sit around and they all know which kind of whiskey each other drinks. And so the topography is easy to analyze, and for me is very, very clear. Thirdly, for me, and which is something that again has caused me to question whether we're talking about an elite that doesn't care or doesn't understand is because we're going through a process that I would call it civic cannibalism, where the Constitution is being destroyed systematically, where the small-scale businesses, medium-scale businesses are being impoverished. I've just been told this morning that I think they have burnt second-hand spare parts. Now, you burn second-hand spare parts. You know, just think of all our Uber drivers. Just think of all the people who've been put out of work. The kind of disconnect that an elite has to be able to do that to its own people says something that is very troubling. And so when we talk of this state capture, we have given a very sophisticated and good-sounding intellectualized name to something a lot cruder that is happening, and that is born of an elite that I think doesn't care, and in part doesn't understand the lives of ordinary people. I think there are many people at the top of government, some who don't even have never held a 1,000-shilling note except at a Harambe. They don't need to. No, they don't even need to have money in the hands, in the pockets, you know, because they don't pay for things, you know. They live a completely different existence. And I think that it's something that the errors that they shall make will become apparent quite soon, and I'll explain that as I close. August 2004, now still in government, the fight against corruption had more or less ended, but I was still in office. I asked to go for leave. I was told, "Where are you going?" So I was not. I stayed at home, and I was guarded there. So I was watching DVDs for 2 weeks, and really struggling. Now I said, "Now here, the eating is open, and people are saying it is us who are eating to me. But your collective responsibility, kwa hivyo, we nyamaza hapo tu. Enjoy some overseas trips. You go business class, you go for a workshop here, you go to America, go to Europe, nice hotel, you know, live that life." I said, for me, it was a great deal of soul searching at that point. So we came up with an idea. We said, let's hold an international anti-corruption conference in Kenya, which we did in August 2004. And let's see whether we can bring leaders from around the world who would re-energize our own leaders. And the person that we chose was the Prime Minister of Georgia, Zurav Zvania, and we got in touch with his office. And Zurav Zvania had been elected after the end of the Cold War, and the method that he had taken in dealing with corruption, which was very systemic and endemic in Georgia, was very impressive. For example, I think he sacked, can't remember the figure, but up to 80% of military generals were sacked. I think the entire traffic police was removed. He did a few radical actions very early that allowed Georgia to change direction in terms of corruption quite dramatically. Very unfortunately for my friend Zurav Zvania, there was a gas leak in his apartment, and he was found dead. But the work that he did persisted. Second last point is this. As we see the challenges that face our elite, or let me say the proclivities and direction in which our elite has taken, seems unstoppable. There's an internal logic that now, even as the president speaks, because the president is we have the most articulate president in Kenya's history in terms of speaking against corruption. But you can see the air coming out of him slowly, because, you know, you're saying the same thing, but things are getting worse. But there's some important measures which I think will kick in, and we can't afford to abandon, especially a civil society. The cutting edge in terms of the fight against corruption globally is a thing called beneficial ownership, beneficial interest, that countries should create registers of companies that are publicly accessible and that show who are the beneficial owners of those companies. Now, I think the UK has started, Denmark, Ukraine, the African Union endorsed this principle in 2015. The Kenya government signed on very strongly in 2016 at the Lancaster House conference on this subject. And if you look at President Kenyatta's Executive Order number 2 of 2018, this issue was there. So to create a global network of information regarding the movement of money through companies that will reduce money laundering and the movement of corrupt monies. Yeah, recognizing that countries alone, EACC is not going to be able to deal with all the corruption we have. It needs a global infrastructure that will deal with this. And I think that's a way to go, especially as we accumulate this debt that we are accumulating both from the West and from China. Finally, I think Kenyans have reached, for me, I think an exciting moment. Listening to both, to especially Wachira, David, and underlying the comments that Bwana Ouko made, we have reached the end of the phase of reform for anti-corruption. Anti-corruption reforms. It's over now. In fact, the Attorney General's report on anti-corruption institutions and legal framework of 2015, you can find it online, shows that Kenya has got the most sophisticated legal and institutional infrastructure for fighting corruption in Africa. So the idea that we can reform, tinker an institution here and there to fix this problem, I think we accept it's over. And it's now a political problem. It's a problem of us as citizens and our leaders basically being held to account and us holding them to account. A perfect storm, I think, is brewing, and we are seeing it in a number of African countries, and I don't think it will miss us here in Kenya. Because there are 7 combined things that are taking place in Kenya. What happened in Sudan to Mr. Bashir? I visited Sudan a number of times. The first time was in 2008, May, and I arrived the day after a group called the Justice and Equality Movement, which is really an ironic term. A rebel group called Justice and Equality Movement had attacked the old capital city of Omdurman. And I arrived the next morning, and my hosts told me things are a bit difficult here because yesterday the rebels attacked Omdurman. And we sat with my hosts in their home, and they were telephoning their colleagues in the Khartoum government, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Internal Security, etc., etc. And people had disappeared. It's not that they had gone somewhere, it's that there was no one at the end of the line and no one knew where they were, and some of them never reappeared. That was the amount of grip that Bashir had. And I was in Sudan in 2017 again, and happened to be in a place where Mr. Bashir was, and I got the same sense of this tremendous grip. But the recent events show us how fragile this is, especially when you have this, what I'm calling a perfect storm, because the kind of state capture that Wachira has described so eloquently in his report. If you think Kenya is bad, Khartoum was far worse. It's really just 10 families. You know, you hear of individuals with 1.5 million acres of, it's really quite incredible. And ironically, one of the things I think state capture necessarily leads to tyranny to sustain itself. It can, an open society and a state that has been captured are incompatible. So it leads to tyranny, and in Kenya's case, it means undermining the constitution and undermining the democratic freedoms that we have fought so hard for and won, and which Kenyans take for granted. But there are 7 things that are happening and that we should watch to create, I think, and are starting a perfect storm. First of all is this fiscal mess that David always has been describing for 6 years very well, and Mr. Ouko touched on, of rampant theft, but also just a profligacy. This sense that from the top to the bottom, actually, we must all steal. In fact, if you are not eating, then you are not trusted. You are not, you're not a player who should be taken seriously. You must eat to be trusted. And this has created a total mess in the management of our fiscal affairs. We've overborrowed and we continue to overspend. The last Eurobond, I think the irony was lost on many of us, where the Minister of Finance basically said, we are borrowing this to pay for existing debts. Yeah. We're borrowing commercially to pay for debts that we borrowed previously commercially, which even Adukawala knows is something that you do not do. Secondly, and this one hit Mr. Bashir quite hard, is we are also in the middle of an economic austerity program, but it's not being called that. But this trick that was done with increasing VAT, we're going to increase VAT by 16%, and then they brought it down to 8%, but it had still gone up. These continuous increases in taxes from the beginning of this year, even small-scale traders are being taxed. You can see the complaints of people who are dealing in second-hand goods. The informal sector are being brought into the economy is what it is being described as. But we're actually in an austerity program. And as far as I know, the government is going back out to the IMF to get their standby facility of $1.5 billion as a kind of security for this new Eurobond. So the fiscal mess, at the same time as economic austerity, so that is hurting people's pockets. Thirdly, our rains have failed. We had a bit of rain here and there the last couple of weeks, but largely even the Met Department says rains have failed. So food is going to be a problem. And because our elite is made to steal, and one of the things that they like to steal, especially around elections, is maize. Maize and sugar. So hunger is coming. Hunger is already there in broad swathes of the country. Fourthly, we're in the middle of a political transition that has already started. The handshake, Tanga group, Kieleweke group, these are things that come with a political transition and realignments in our political elite. And historically in Kenya, that means an economic slowdown, violence here and there. Fifthly, is the crisis around elections. We now don't have any agency that can hold elections in this country that people will believe in. You know, and there doesn't appear, there's no political will on any side to deal with it. Yeah, we have an IEBC that was broken. Even the Constitutional Court opined on their performance. We had 2 elections in 2017. That same group are the ones who are involved in the census that is about to start, and then elections. So that is a danger. Sixthly, again, and I think this is a global phenomena, our international partners. Kenya is one of the historically, the most open economy and society on this side of Africa. And we are proud of that. Kenya is full of Ethiopians, Eritreans, Ugandans, Rwandese, everybody. And that has been part of our resilience as Kenyans. And we have had friends everywhere. But we are seeing among some of our powerful friends, big changes happening. United States is a very different country today to what it was some years ago. We are seeing what's happening in Europe with Brexit. We are seeing a more assertive Middle East in our part of the world. China, of course, Turkey, Iran, India, Russia. All these are now players in our political situation in a way that is unprecedented in the history of Kenya. Lastly is, even though our elite seem to be united in eating by various things right now, and we don't have an opposition, there's actually quite a great deal of fragmentation within the elite itself. And violence tends to follow a fragmented elite, where the only thing that is uniting them is eating and the prospect of eating. So I think for us in civil society, what may seem to be a rather stark prognosis for Kenya provides a tremendous opportunity, because it provides us with some legitimacy. The things that Bwana Ouko has been telling us about the management of our finances have been seen to be manifestly true. Even those who try to politicize it have given up. David D was abused in 2013 when he was telling us about Eurobond and other things. Sasa wamenyamaza. They're asking him to apply to take over from Rotich. So I think this provides us with a tremendous opportunity. And it also, is also for me, the fact that AfriCOG has been able to gather us here around this issue at this level of interrogation of the matter is an example that we are hopefully at the cusp of a new engagement by civic society in Kenya around the issues that really matter as we go into a very, very uncertain period over the coming 18 months. Thank you very much.